My name is Rich Schmidt. I'm here with Jackson Holstein at Granville Wine Company in Dundee. It's June 10th, 2020. Jackson, thanks so much for joining us today.
Yeah, absolutely.
First question, most important question. Why wine?
Why wine? I don't know that I have much of a choice in the matter. It's just been part of our family and what we've done for the longest time. It's what I grew up around, and I frankly haven't known much else. And, you know, at first it was a cultural thing for our family, something that my father, was his profession. And then as I came into the professional world, it was something that I really found the value in, and I found the how special of an industry and how special a product we've created here in Oregon, and just happy to be a part of it.
So, did you ever, you mentioned not really knowing anything else and not having much of a choice. Yeah. Did you ever consider doing something else, or was this kind of the path you always had?
No, you know, this, for most people, the perspective on me being where I was as a son of a grower for however many decades, 4 decades, it seemed like it was the obvious choice for me. But in higher education, college, I wasn't set on that, and it wasn't something till the end of my college years that I really thought it was something I would consider. And what started off as earning a little bit of summer money or some, working harvest just to go back to school and have a little bit of beer money, turned into I really fell in love with the process and was a little bit more purposeful and a little bit more absorbent of the information and the level of knowledge that was around me. And so through that process, it was, you get a piece of paper. Mine was, more in the environmental sciences, natural resource management, and you get a piece of paper and you got a choice, right? And with the choice, having worked a few harvests at Argyle, I got the opportunity to study abroad or work abroad. I worked harvest down and under in Australia, and I faced with this choice of working in professional. Really high intellect people with that was global, and travel the world, eat great food, drink great wine, and be part of a process that is to drive world-class wines here in Oregon. And I thought I'd be pretty dumb for turning that down.
Was there, you mentioned the kind of like, you kind of grow up around it, you're familiar with it, you don't make a big deal about it because it just kind of is what you know. Yeah. Was there, then you talk about the kind of the next step in terms of like understanding the seriousness and the hard work. Is there a moment for you, or was there a time for you when you, that switch kind of flipped and you thought it went from it turned into something special?
No, I didn't have a true breakthrough moment. There was a time period certainly that was super, there was a shift that took place, and that shift was vintage 2013 for me. I'd been making wine in a barn down in Corvallis in college. Kind of, you get a few picking bins of fruit, and was playing around and played around, made some pretty good wines out of a barn. and about that time I came back, and before finishing up school I worked at 13 Harvest at Argyle, and didn't know anything, but at the same time I knew something because of just the natural influence of osmosis, right? And so it was kind of this period where I had the influence of my upbringing that came in. There was kind of like the confluence of two rivers, so to speak, where I had this background of knowledge, but I never had the chance to apply it, and I never had the interest or the intent to expand it. And so seeing what my father had dedicated his life to, with the people he had dedicated with, Roland was still at Argyle at that time, and it was kind of like, they'd walk through a cellar and see this little rugrat who grew up in diapers, cleaning barrels, and they just loved it, right? They loved every minute of that. I thought, this is pretty rich. I don't really enjoy this, but, they gave me the dirtiest jobs, and I'd been used to washing picking bins probably my whole life. But, when you're on full-time payroll and you're the kid of a long-time employee, they like to put you through the ringer a little bit. And so there was this time of, I felt like I had to earn something. I had to earn my way, but at the same time, I was more absorbent than I had ever been, at least in an adult state of mind. And there was people of influence, Jim Marsh, Jimmy Jr. I was probably somewhere in that time. He's like, you're going to be making wine. I just don't know when. You can't look me straight in the eye. He's like, you're going to be doing this for the rest of your life. You just don't know it yet. And about that time, Cody Wright, Purple Hands, I've been working vintage 13, and one morning he picked me up. We went for a drive around some vineyards, and he just started like breaking it down for me. Like, listen, this is what you got to do. It's about the numbers, and it's about really finding your niche within this industry. And I had people kind of come to me and approach me and kind of give me pep talks, and I was like, why are they giving me these, right? Like, I'm just trying to make some beer money. And then it kind of hit me that there was support from me, and there's a lot of support within this industry, and all of a sudden I felt like it was no longer a choice, but it was kind of a legacy, and it was, don't screw it up, kid. That was kind of the message that I was absorbing, was you have an opportunity, don't screw it up. And so to this day, I just try not to screw it up. That's the biggest goal, but yeah.
Once you have that, once that starts to kind of sink in about the legacy and not screwing it up, what were the steps you took at that point to solidify your career and not screw it up?
Yeah, if you come into consciousness, you come out of your teenager, you come into consciousness, and you start to absorb things, and it was when I stepped back and looked at the respect that the people around me had, right? The amount of people, whether it was Nate Klosterman at Argyle, whether it was Rollin, whether it was my father, whether it was, Code, all these people I had around me in the industry, and I saw the amount of respect and how well they had approached their craft. And it was one of those things where, okay, Jackson, you got to be even a bigger sponge, right? And you got to really soak this up. First vintage I was making my own wine was 14, and Jacques at Tory Moore was another influence who smacked me up the side of the head a few times, like, what are you doing, kid, right? And so it was trying to take your ego out of it and realize you're a young kid in this industry who's been in the industry for a long time, but you still got so much to learn. And so it wasn't the steps I took, other than just the mental adjustments, I took a internship with RP with Result Partners, and ran around vineyards for a summer with Sarah Martin, who's now the head viticulturist at Bergstrom, and we were both kind of at a stage of figuring out what was next for us and how we were going to approach this, and went back in 14, that next 14 vintage, went back to Argyle and worked vintage, worked with a good guy who was a cellar master in Australia, and had some connections to a winery down in Australia, and it was like, okay, I'm gonna jump into this. And so my partner at the time, now my wife, and I went down to Australia for vintage 15 down there. We'd already started making our wine here, and so we worked 14 vintage at other wineries. She worked at Belpont, and so we did our little winemaking at night. We get done with our vintage jobs and check out at whatever time it was, and go up to Tory Moore and make some wine, and wake up at crack of dawn and do it all over again. And so we finished 14 harvests and then jumped down, and it was really just that initiation, doing 2 vintages in a harvest or multiple vintages, and then trying to seek out knowledge from those who are, from the people who you respect and admire most in the industry. And that's what we did, was you go and seek time out with these people, and you seek their knowledge. And so, yeah, just a purposeful, thoughtful approach to who do you want to be influenced by, and find their ear and listen to them. So, yeah.
So you talked a bit about your dad and his influence.
Yeah.
Tell me about being second generation in the industry, and the legacy the shadow he casts, the legacy he has. How do you honor that while also taking the step forward and making a name for yourself? Yeah,
it's turns out it's a fine balance. He came into this industry and tried to establish it in a time where this, Willamette Valley, you could mention that in any marketplace and probably look at you and scratch their head, right? It was like, what's that and what do they make? I mean, so he grew up in a different time period in this industry, and while our time briefly overlapped, it was pretty brief. And I carry a little bit of that weight in the sense that he went through so many of the developmental phases that this industry went through, especially viticulturally, and then was witness to so much of how that viticultural impacted in the winemaking process. He was involved with the Druin project when they were first getting going, and Stoller, and was the architect upon their first plantings, and along with Argyle. And so, he went through some fires, and they molded him, and they gave him this breadth of knowledge that. Sometimes I have to slow him down and say, Dad, like, slow down. What I need, what I need is something very specific, right? And it's a privilege, it's an honor, and it's also a burden that Ayla and I welcome. In the sense, the burden is to how do you take that, what he developed, his knowledge base, and how do you further it, right? I mean, we're only here on this earth doing what we do for so long, and every day I'm trying to capture what he's learned and then apply it and portray it and make it better. And we have a huge difference of opinions on so many things, right? As one could imagine, right? But the beautiful thing is that it makes us both better. And one of the things I'm most proud of my father is he's continued to evolve. The farming practices and the mindset he brought to the industry 30 years ago is so different than what he's doing out there today. And so it's a privilege also to just see him evolve, and then helps me evolve. And the shadow he casts, I think, is mostly in other people's heads. We drive each other a bit nuts, but it's all in good fun, and it's something that we enjoy, especially this year with so much of the pandemic happening. We've had a little more time on our hands, and we've approached the farming of let's get dirty again, and something that I haven't had the privilege of doing for 3 or 4 years now. As much, and so that's been kind of a nice return to not normalcy, but to kind of where we belong. I got, after working vintage and doing that stuff, I was doing vineyard management as we were building Granville, and was fighting some of the same fires my father fought for a long time, and so yeah.
Mm-hmm. So you talk about viticulture, especially. Alan Holstein is viticulture. Like that's the term. So you have started your own wine company. You're making wine. So tell me about the decision to do that. What was there something about the process of winemaking that attracted you? Why Granville? Why start Granville?
I don't know anything in particular other than just that it's a process, right? And so I think to be a winemaker, a grower and a winemaker specifically, you have to enjoy the process, and you have to live in the details. You have to embrace the details and understand how you may never fully comprehend how any one of them matter, but you know how the sum of them are so important, and you kind of have to live with that sometimes, of knowing that it's the combination of details and meticulous approach that you take that can make the ultimate product so much better. And so no, there was no one thing that I said, other than just the general excitement around harvest. That's always just something that's captivated me. It's this camaraderie of, it's hard. It's brutal sometimes, but if you don't love it, you don't belong in the industry. And it's that just general, about a week before we start picking every year, I just drive around the valley and look at the few sites that we source from. I just get this energy and this just kind of you can just feel it. It's almost like it's in your bones a little bit, and I don't know what my life would be like without that. I'd be so rudderless if I didn't have that every single year, right? And so no, it's enjoying the process and enjoying that annual, that really your work for the entire growing season comes to a head, and then it comes to an end, and then a whole nother process begins in here, right? And joining those things together, and the seasonality of it, and the process, and kind of it's so, it puts so many things in perspective for you, whether you're growing it, making it, and you have to be okay understanding that you're not the most important thing in here sometimes, right? And you can do any number of things, but sometimes the inevitable still happens. And so nothing specific about the process other than the process itself. It's just something that I've always loved. So.
Tell me about learning that lesson you just talked about. What was there? Tell me about a time when
still learning
when that was kind of driven home for you.
I mean, every year I feel like I just get my ass kicked, right? And you just gotta be okay with it. But I mean, I can give you a more recent example of this past year. You know, it was, I don't know, probably it was like September 8th, 9th, 10th, something like that. And we got a week forecast of straight rain, and I'm thinking, like, I've nailed this. Like, I've done everything to this point, and it could not matter if we have cracking and things go south. But so we were, I got some help, but we were out there de-leafing the sunny side for a week straight, and just trying to get the moisture in the canopy down, and it's things like that just like it doesn't matter. And that, so every year there's a lesson. And I think, to walk into a vintage like 2013, having been around so many vintages, but more on the periphery, but 13 being the first vintage that I really dove headfirst into, and be a part of that and see the amount that people had writing on the line, and see how a week of bad weather can just torment someone or weeks, right? And that was a lesson. There's lessons every single day, but more specifically, there's broader lessons every single year of just understanding your place, and understanding that sometimes nature's just got other plans. So yeah.
So as you decided to dive into winemaking, tell me about the process of learning the trade and of developing the philosophy for what you wanted your wines to be.
Yeah, learning the trade, my father was a viticulturist. He was never a winemaker. I had to obtain that knowledge. That wasn't something that was handed over to me. Everything up to the point which the grapes arrive at the door was more or less, I had enough knowledge to be dangerous there, but the winemaking process was something that was a whole nother ball game. I'd been around it. I'd seen certain activities and been a part of certain activities in the cellar, but certainly never had the knowledge to make have the confidence to make a bottle of wine, put it on the table, say I made that, and that's going to be high quality. So that process started in 2013, just being at Argyle and seeing how professionals approached it, right? And what's so fun about some of those bigger cellars is how many people are there and how they all branch off and do their own thing, and you stay in contact with them. And biggest influences, without a doubt, being surrounded. I grew up with Cody, I grew up with Jim Marsh, and so as I'm coming up and I got questions about wine, I call them, let's open a bottle of wine, let's talk about it, right? Mm-hmm. And so that was part one, and then it came to just getting dirty myself. And so 13, 14, 15, working vintages, then in the cellar, never had a winemaking position or assistant winemaker position, just was watching every move in every cellar that I was ever part of, and so watching how Jacques and Torrymore did things, going over dinner at Belpont and hearing how Brian approached things, calling Cody, calling Jim, calling Roland, calling all these people, and being able to reference back to the decades of knowledge some of them have had. So it was no one mentor, it was no one spot or stop for me along my journey and professionalism, right? Mm-hmm. It was, I have a goal, and that goal was to capitalize on what I think is a really special property up here, and make the best wine from that. And so it was the mission is to now go and absorb knowledge from some of the best in the industry, and that's what I set off to do.
So tell me about what makes this property special in your eyes.
Yeah. We're a Holstein vineyard, originally planted in 72 by a gentleman named Gary Fuquay. It was unrooted. About 1990, Phloxera was discovered, just the adjacent property over. My father, and maybe what was a little bit of a knee-jerk reaction, decided to immediately start replanting. So we now have, it's 10-acre property, about 8 acres, planted all Pinot Noir across 4 different clones, and around 3 different aspects, from south to west to east. This site sits about just shy of 800 feet, and any number of things can make it special. I certainly think we have such across 8 acres. I don't know that you come up with more of a contrast between the west, the east, the high elevation. It goes all the way down to close to 600 feet, and so the depth of soils and the different combination of the clones my father has here. But what makes it special is the amount of energy someone puts into it, right? It's the amount of times you cast your shadow. It's the amount of times your families cast a shadow. It's the amount of times multiple generations, from my father to myself to my wife to now my kid, right? We have 3 generations here casting their shadow. And so what makes this place special is a care factor. It's the care factor, it's the history of good wine, and it's this place and how in love with it we are. When you're in love with a place and what's underneath your feet, you feel it, and you do your damnedest to represent it in a way that is special to you. So, yeah.
So talk about the start of Granville and the growth so far, and what you're setting out for, and maybe what you're heading toward.
Yeah. Start off making a couple hundred cases, like I was mentioned, in the cellar of Tory Moore. I was working vintage and then switched to managing vineyards. My wife worked at Belpont. We worked internationally and came back and continued in 15. She managed restaurant. I managed vineyards, and for the first few years, this was just, we were winemakers by night. It was outside of the fact that my family was in the industry, we were every bit of just dreamers. Making a couple hundred cases. We had no business with it. We had no money. And for that matter, very little knowledge, but was determined to gain that knowledge. And I knew that the only way to do that was to jump in 2 feet. And so that's what we did. Made, I want to say, about 350 cases the first year. Bootstrapped the whole thing financially, patchwork. Really had no business financially doing it. And the first vintage, we've been really lucky here in Oregon. We've had a string of phenomenal vintages, and 14 was first of a string of them. And so we managed to make looking back at the time, I was hyper sensitive and hyper focused on, the 2 wines we made that year. We made a Holstein vineyard and we made a barrel select. And they turned out really well. And, first thing my father told me when I brought him a bottle of wine that was finished, I opened it, pour it for him, he liked it, and he goes, "Better lucky than smart." I was just like, ouch, right? And I think it was his way of humbling me, all right, one good vintage kid, don't get ahead of your skis, right? I said, yeah, okay, well, watch me. I'm going to do it again and again and again and again. Still thinking that I had the ultimate control of this whole thing, right? And so we've kept making wine, 15, 16, 17, and we went from 300 cases, I think 17, we made right around 1,200 cases. And about that time, it was, I was sharing facilities and getting to a size that wasn't uncomfortable, but it was uncomfortable to, you're making such a big meal, you don't want to share the kitchen with another cook, so to speak. And so we had a little space up here on the vineyard. Had a little bit of money and thought, I'll build a barn. I made wine in a barn in college, and I've seen what it takes to make high quality wine, and a giant chateau is not what you need. You can do a lot of things with limited amount of space, and so with the means we had, we built this facility. It's about 2,500 square feet. My wife and I designed it. And when I said designed it, determined where the 4 walls and the draining floor was. It's really not that complicated. Put a little extra insulation in. And so 2018, we built this, produced right around 2,000 cases. and over the years we had taken a portion. In about 2015, I started leasing the vineyard for my father. Started leasing, portions of it out, selling it, and then keeping, I think we kept 2 acres for ourselves for the first year, and then slowly grew into the shoe, so to speak, which is our state vineyard here at Holstein. And so now we make about, depending on the area, anywhere between 22 to 2,800 cases in here, and predominantly Pinot Noir, Chardonnay. We have a sparkling project that we're doing here, a state sparkling project that we're doing extended tirage with, a little bit of rosé, and that's it. So it's really been a natural evolution. We've tried to grow it slowly, consciously, with never overextending ourselves, and the whole time really the focus being on how to best represent these hills. So my wife is born and raised here, I'm born and raised here, and so we wanted this wine to be grown here, produced here, bottled here, and really the estate model that the old world has done so well, and that was our goal. And so that's what we do.
And you mentioned you sourced some grapes from outside the property as well?
Yep. Over the past few years, I started working with Murto Vineyard back in 2015. Mike and Robin Murto have since have moved out of the industry, but that was one of the first vineyards I started sourcing fruit from. I couldn't afford hardly any of their fruit, but I wanted it, and so I said, I'll do some tractor work. I'll make you guys a little bit of wine on the side if you can give me, like that much fruit. They kind of pat me on the head, like, okay, yeah, kid, whatever. And I thought I struck gold with 1.5 tons. And so, I started buying fruit from them in 2015, and then as I made wine and didn't screw it up, people continued to buy it, and I did all my own sales here in the state of Oregon with the help of my wife, and so we slowly got some esteem going and continued purchasing fruit. We purchased some Chardonnay from Spirit Hill Vineyard, which is a site my father planted. Working now with Coosa Farms, Kevin Chambers' property, just above Brooks down there for Chardonnay. We've also worked with some other smaller sites that I planted when I was managing vineyard. Worked with some fruit from Mo Ayoub down at his Anonimo site. So predominantly Pinot Noir from Dundee and Chardonnay from Yola, and that has been where we have stayed for the most part.
What are you looking for in a site? What attracted you to Murto in the first place, and what has attracted you to sites since then?
Yeah. One qualification we're always looking for is older vines, and the only thing that I will ignore that for is the care factor, right? And Kevin Chambers' situation at Coosa Farms, I don't know that there's a care factor that's any higher than Kevin Chambers and what they're doing down there, Carla, Nate, and so they're a second generation, and they've been in the industry for a long time, and I said, this is a fit. This is a fit. Their site's new, it's developing, but full of potential. And so being a multi-generational, older established vines with a care factor, and that's what we look for, is a relationship with a grower who cares about their site as much as we care about ours, and understanding, having some commonality with how we approach farming and how we go about caring for these vines and expressing the terroir of whether it be the Dundee Hills, Yola, but generally speaking the Lamb Valley. It's matchmaking, and as much of it is I've never fallen in love with one soil type, one AVA, or one aspect, or any one clone. I'm looking for a mixture of unique place with established vines with the care factor, and if it has all those things, sign me up.
As you look ahead, are there other sites, other varietals, other types of things you want to look for as your business grows, or have you kind of found the niche you want?
I think I got my hands full doing the best I can with what we have, right? That's the thing about winemaking is you're never done. And I think the type of personality that gets into this industry is a bit of a perfectionist, which I'm guilty of. And so, no, I feel like I'm still trying to perfect Pinot Noir in the Lamp Valley, and as wild, crazy as that seems, right? There's so many great wines coming out of this region from so many amazing producers. think we can still do better. And Oregon Chardonnay, I mean, where do we get started? I mean, that is the point. We are just getting started with Oregon Chardonnay, and really trying to capture as a valley, well, what is the terroir of the Willamette Valley with Chardonnay? We've probably only uncovered a very small percentage of the possibilities with the Oregon Chardonnay, and then traditional method, sparkling. That's also an area that we're exploring, and so all those things, I feel like there's enough to explore right here with those things, and we're not done. So no, I don't get. I know there's a lot of really interesting varietals out there that folks like Jason Lett's exploring with, and so many winemakers who explore these varietals and can bring them to the forefront. There's a lot of interesting things going on with Gamay and some really phenomenal wines being made. But for me and my bandwidth and what I feel like we can accomplish here, my focus is estate, Pinot Noir, Chardonnay, and sparkling that can really capture the essence, and we're still trying to perfect that. So no.
Hands full.
Hands full.
You talked about starting the brand, just basically just you and your wife, and selling all of your own wine. Tell me about that process of taking a product that you've worked so hard on to market and selling it and putting it out there for people to judge and to possibly buy.
It's like walking into high school every day and asking the prettiest girl at school to date you, right? And just getting, your face slammed in the locker every single day. No. It's tough. And it's something that I think every winemaker should have to do, is have to have that process of selling their wines so they can understand what is just marketing that really serves no purpose other than something to talk about, right? And what are the things that really drive home quality and point of sale, right? And the things that can really convey through to a consumer what you were doing, right? And so it kind of helped me understand what are the important notes here you need to hit on when you get face time with buyers in the market. But being judged is something no one's super comfortable with, right? There came a time I had made 2 vintages, and finally we did a over vintage barrel age on the first vintage, and so there was a day where I woke up and said, I gotta sell some wine. We bottled this, we labeled it, I gotta sell some wine, and I've never done this, right? I had experience in growing. I finally had accumulated some knowledge to be proficient in winemaking. Wine sales was like, I'll figure it out when I get there. That was probably a mistake. But no, the beautiful thing about it was I came from it I didn't have any influences on me saying, you got to do it this way, or you got to do it that way. You have to, you got to protect your brand. I had none of that influence on me. It was, here's my wine, here's me. Let me show you what I do every day through this glass of wine, right? And so, I drove to Portland, put some cases in my pickup truck, and said, the goal is to not come home with them today. And I walked in with my boots dirty on these wine shops and said, hey, I'm Jackson Holstein, you should try my wine. They kind of looked at me like, get out of here. It's like, no, really, like, try this, please. And a little bit of persistence, a little bit of authenticity went a long ways. And that's what I found out more than anything, was there's a whole lot of bullshit out there. And the authenticity of a grower, farmer that has their heart and soul in this is what ultimately sells our products, and what to this day I think I have relationships and sales that gone back from those first few weeks, first few months of ever selling anything in my life, much less wine, anything, right? And I've maintained those relationships. They've seen us evolve, and they've seen, again, they might have liked the wine, but the care factor was there. They saw the authenticity, and you combine all those things. And I said, you represent me, and I'll do my best to support you. And you develop these partnerships and people who are really an extension of your brand, who are going out on a limb to recommend your bottle at a table for dinner, right? And when people are going out on a limb to make that recommendation, that's really powerful. You're making a recommendation, my short life's work, to some folks who are celebrating their 40th wedding anniversary, and so that was powerful, and that was motivating, and that was something that I said, okay, it's the authenticity, and there's enough corporate, there's enough of so many other influences on not just the wine market, but all types of markets, right? Mm-hmm. And when you can get the real thing walking in the door, wearing their product, and their heart on their sleeve, so to speak, I think is refreshing, and I think it's something that consumers see and wine buyers see.
If someone has some of your wine, opens a bottle, what would be the ultimate reaction? What's the ultimate takeaway for you? What do you want them to get out of a bottle of your wine?
I want them to get out an experience. I want them to. It's a conversation, right? And a conversation is never monotone. A conversation is never one-sided. A conversation develops, it evolves. So from the moment that cork is popped, I want the wines to say something from beginning to end, and I want those things to be different, right? And so we aim to make a wine that is expressive, not overstated, but certainly expressive, and one that, over a 2-3 hour sit-down meal will show you different sides to itself, express different elements of itself, and I think maybe an overused term is complexity, right? but for lack of vocabulary, I think it's really important that people sit, and that's why I always advocate, and why restaurants are so important, why it's so hard right now, is because I want people to sit down and pop, pour, make a analysis of the wine, but continue that conversation, right? Mm-hmm. Take that conversation, go somewhere with it, pair it with multiple foods, pair it with different emotions, and let us see what it tells you, right? And that's what I want, is an experience and a conversation that has a beginning, middle, and end, and continues on through someone's evening. It's hopefully a good evening. So.
You talked about the kind of run of strong vintages lately, ending in 2019, I believe, in terms of great, perfect weather. Tell me about adjusting. You talked a little bit about it earlier, but tell me about that adjustment you have to make in a year like 2019, and what you've done to your wines that are sitting in barrels right now. Yeah.
The adjusting starts in the vineyard, right? Every year, we talk about adjusting in the winery. We're adjusting in the vineyards come now, when or even before this, we're adjusting bud counts per plant based on the vigor of the vines, and all the way to the amount of sunlight we allow in the canopy, to the amount of weight we put on that vine, is in the context how much fruit we allow it to ripen, right? So that conversation has huge impacts on the quality of wine and what it's going to do. And so the conversation starts in the field with building it's already there, an ecosystem, and supporting an ecosystem that can ripen a perfect berry, right? But as a human, being part of that conversation that nudges the vines a little more, a little less, right? And trying to see where that gets you. And this conversation through the growing season, we were just looking at records and looking at the moisture accumulation up to this point in June. That derives our farming practices for July. Our heat unit accumulation for June will derive our farming practices for July and August, and so on and so forth. And then July will sit down, August will sit down and look at these things, look at what the vines are telling us, look at what our data is telling us. So a vintage like 19, a vintage like 20, it's almost a day-to-day thing for us. And again, it's a little bit obsessive, and a little bit it can be tiresome, but it's so rewarding. And so what I was mentioning earlier, where we had perfect ripening season setting up for 19, and we got a little bit of moisture, which was actually just the perfect amount. At the time, I think everyone could get a little nervous, but anyone who's been around Oregon long enough knows that you don't really get too concerned until you're getting 5 inches in September. So, the moisture was something we adjusted to, right? It was a conversation. What was our adjustment? We opened up the canopy, allowed the clusters to breathe a little bit, try to get a little cross breeze. And we're just a bit more meticulous on the sorting table. And then once it gets in the cellar, it's a whole nother process. Once you get into the fermenter, your first thing is when to pick, your composition of the ferment, whole cluster, all these things, right? And how you want to guide this. And for me, first thing is we always want wines that are built to last. 2018 vintage was my son's vintage, and I told myself, I want to make wines that I can sit down with him and drink when he's 20, 21 years old, 12 years old, whatever. And so, you always want to have that fine balance of something that's approachable and something that I want to be able to revisit in decades. And so every little part matters. It all matters. And I can't, I can say that luckily for us in the 19 vintage, sorry, I got a spider hanging off my hat. Luckily for us in the 19 vintage, that little bit of moisture held things on, and the acid was perfect, and the ripening was really just spot on. At the time, it did have me a little nervous. I probably had an extra martini in the evening, but the thing that was beautiful about it was sometimes it's not what you want, but it's exactly what you need, right? And that little bit of moisture, that shot of moisture right in early, mid-September was just what we needed, and it allowed things to hang, mature. The integrity of the fruit was beautiful, and it was something that played out just in time, and we made the adjustments in the field that we thought were necessary, and then vice versa. And in the winery we made some slight adjustments, but just being a bit more meticulous on the sorting table, and we actually used quite a bit of whole cluster in 19, because I thought it was a great vintage for it. To answer your question specifically, no one thing, just all of it. Yeah.
I'm curious about developing the confidence to make those kinds of decisions and to deal with those kinds of things in the moment. Still developing. Any winemaker that can sit here and say they never have doubt about a decision, one of those big decisions they make, I think is kidding themselves a little bit. Sometimes that's the thing. I think what winemakers have to be best at is not afraid to fail sometimes. And that's really what makes a great winemaker, I think, is not being afraid to fail. And then once you understand a concept, whether, stem inclusion, stem exclusion, whatever it is, and understanding when to apply them, when not to, through not just, vintage characteristics, but, for example, there's a difference of when I use stem on our west side versus our east side versus our south side. And even micro sections of those blocks. And so there's the confidence develops from failing, and I'll continue to fail, but through those failures there's a lot of triumphs, and we've had enough triumphs and wines that I'm really proud of that continue to give me the confidence, but every once in a while they'll still humble you, so that's good news, I guess. So, how much, I know you mentioned like leasing the vineyard from your dad, sort of taking over from him. How much is his influence still out there? How much is his blood and sweat and tears are still out there? A lot. His influence on the day-to-day, he's kind of like the bird on my shoulder more than anything. It's an interesting dynamic we have where he's my landlord, but he's also retired and doesn't have anything else to do, so he'll show up and start lifting wires, and I said, well, hey, you're doing that wrong, right? And he'll say, no, I'm doing it right. And I'm like, I'm paying the bills, damn it. And so it's kind of one of those deals where his influence his involvement is high in the standpoint that when your father is your volunteer tractor driver and your landlord and is retired and wants to see you succeed, that he shows up and helps you out. You can't complain, but and it's pretty special. But at the same time, we've evolved. He's evolved, but I've evolved from what his practices were. We incorporate elements of biodynamic and organic into what we do here, and it's something that he's never had experience with, and so it's been a learning experience for him, and so it's kind of like the old school, new school clash a little bit, and you kind of get this weird mixture that ultimately I think makes the process more refined and more, vetted, so to speak. I think my father's biggest strength and the biggest thing he brings to what Ayla and I do on a daily basis is he's the devil on the shoulder, reminding you of 86, reminding me of 94, right? Of all these things and what they did and what the end result was from his lens. And so
having that perspective, him bringing perspective and to someone who's only been in the industry since, really since 2013, that's invaluable, right? The business is ours, the vineyard is something we've taken over, but his care factor is still high, and so it's pretty valuable to have him, with weather records that go back 3 decades, and for him to volunteer the perspective every once in a while is really special, and something that I wouldn't be here without it. I wouldn't have the opportunity to do this without him. Once in a while, I might ask him to keep the comments to himself. It might be, 5th week of harvest going on, multiple 18-hour days or whatever it is, and he's reminding me of things that I don't want to be reminded of, and have to tell him to, not now, Al. But it's a really fun process, and it's I think one of the things that makes us unique here is just the perspective he brings to a young generation who's tackling this in a different way, and he's just the constant reminder of what has happened and what can happen. So, yeah.
You mentioned earlier the struggle right now without restaurants. Obviously, we're in the middle of COVID-19. We're not exactly sure what lays ahead for us. Tell me how things have changed for you and your business during this, and how you've seen things change around the industry as well.
First of all, we've received phenomenal support, and from from a variety of outlets, and that's been really encouraging to see. And so we've tried to pay it forward and helping. And there's kind of the restaurant industry is a huge branch to what us as a wine industry do, right? Food and wine don't really exist, in my opinion. Don't belong without one another, right? And to have them struggling so much has been really challenging to see, and it's certainly. It's kind of like when your brother's struggling or your sibling's struggling. It's painful. So how's it affected us and the broader industry as a whole is, I think people are refocusing their efforts with sales to trying to, how are we reaching that consumer without the restaurant there? How are we doing that, whether it's digitally, whether it's through any number of outlets, most of them digital. How do we do that, and how do we distinguish ourselves in this, this mass sea of online media? And I can't tell you that we're the best at it, but I think what all of us are doing are really just focusing on that, helping our out-of-state partners reach out to wine shops and wine clubs and things of that nature, trying to do enough through wine clubs and direct-to-consumer that it keeps us, in the positive, and doing everything we can for our local restaurants and restaurants abroad that hope they can get back on our feet. And ultimately, that means this whole COVID thing goes away, right? But in the meantime, they need all the support we can. So there's a number of programs, a number of wineries doing a number of things to help out the restaurants because they're just so essential to what we do. And if the sooner they get back up and running and manage to just survive, the better off everyone is. So. The adjustments, we're still making them and trying to gauge, when we can get in front of people. Thankfully, here in Yamhill County, we're opening up. We're starting to host tastings privately. And so it's been a lot of how do we make sure everyone feels safe? How do we give people the experience that they deserve, that we want to give them, while also making sure that they're very protected and safe, and we're protected and safe, and we can give them something that's representative, 99% representative of what they would have experienced had they come up here pre-COVID. And that's really been what we've been focusing on is how to give experiences that replicate what we did before all this happened. Mm-hmm.
What do you see as you look ahead for Oregon wine, and has that vision changed with COVID?
Depends if you ask me on a pessimistic day or optimistic day, right? And that's the truth, is we all have those days. But optimistically, I think you hope that Oregon brands and wineries and restaurants can endure this for the length of time needed, right? And so I'm really optimistic to the day that this isn't a fear of ours as a population anymore, right? And we can continue on enjoying company, enjoying family, enjoying socialization without the fear of having to contract this deadly virus. And so I'm not so much, it hasn't dimmed my light on what I think the future of Oregon wine is. The future of Oregon wine is really bright, and there's such a vast pool here of high intellect people with resources that are dedicated to bring about the best wines this valley can possibly produce. And I don't know that a year or 2 years of slow sales is going to change that. That's my hope, and my hope is that we take this time and we sharpen ourselves. We go back and revise our processes from a winemaking, growing, sales, and we kind of sharpen ourselves to make sure that we are really, when things do get back to some level of normalcy, that we have bettered ourselves on the other side of this. And that's what Ayla and I are focusing on, is what can we do. Because when it's summer here, and I mean, it's between the growing, the sales, and the entertainment, the hospitality side of it, for which is a small team here, as in myself, my wife, my kid, we have an assistant, and the dogs, and Alan on the days that he's not, doesn't want to retire off the beach. So it's a lot, and it's really hard in that time to focus on self-betterment. And so that's what we've taken this time to do, and I hope that others in the industry are doing. I know others in the industry are doing that, and hopefully we come out this as an industry better for it, and also gives us time to focus on maybe some broader issues. Some of the civil rights right now that we are witnessing take place, of being challenged here, and rights that are clearly being taken away from people of color. That's something that I think the wine industry is. I'm part of some groups that are coming together and trying to put some brain power towards how do we diversify our industry, right? Those are things that I don't know we would have all the brain power for. I mean, certainly in the case of making this a more inclusive industry, we should always have the time and energy to do that. But having this, not being distracted, I think just speeds up the process so much more with these things. And so that's what I'm optimistic about, is maybe everyone's margins isn't the best, but we might have the opportunity to take this time and do something with it, right? And make things better for our industry and for our processes. So that's my deepest desire, and that's my hope.
What about as you look ahead for your own business? Plans for the future, projects for the future? Do you have a size in mind, or are you just kind of finding it as you go?
Manageable. How about that for a size? Manageable. We're at the kind of perfect level between 2,000 and 3,000 cases where I have no excuse to not get something right. Anything larger, I feel like the excuse could be there of I just had so much, right? And for me and Ayla, we want to know all our customers on a first name basis. I want to be able to track these barrels as they evolve through their entire élevage. And those are things that we might lose if we grow. So I think most of our growth revolves around hospitality, how we can better our hospitality, from food to hosting and all those things. And then our sparkling project, something we've focused on. But going forward for the future, I think it's just refine, perfect, and be part of the conversation in the valley that pushes that forward. There's such a high level of intellect, and for us, our plans are to be here where my family's been for 4 decades, to raise a family in this industry, and for them to understand the work that goes into this, and hopefully people appreciate it and enjoy it on the other end. And at the end of the day, we don't have any bright plans. We don't have we're not building a big clubhouse or anything like that. It's pretty modest here, and so no massive plans other than to just make damn good wine.
All right, last question for you.
Yep.
I'm going to get a little philosophical on you.
Okay.
What is wine's purpose in society?
I think it's a glue to conversation. I think wine is, wow. It's a rallying call. It's something that can bring people together, and just like food does, right? It's those meals, it's those sit downs, it's those. It's something that at the end of our day we can sit down, open a bottle of wine, and have conversations. It's something that pushes conversations, holds them together, and is a rallying cry for people that maybe otherwise wouldn't come together. And it's also something that for me it's it's a break, right? I can have a break with people and converse about everything outside of wine too. But and I also think it's that's what's the physical role of the liquid in the bottle, when it's sat down table. What's its role? But what's the role of the industry broadly? I think, especially in the backdrop of what's happening in our world right now, we have to view this also as a mechanism to improve people's lives, right? This industry has a lot of wealth. I don't think that's any secret. And people, and as an industry, we need to recognize that. And if we need to be giving back to communities that are giving to us, and we need to have a good perspective and self-evaluation of how we are evolving and what type of industry we want to be, especially here in Oregon, right? I think the diversity is something that's really been brought to the forefront in this past month, that we lack diversity in this industry hugely. And there's, thankfully my father's involved with Ahi Voi, which is a educational development program for Latinos in the wine community. And that's so important, but we need mentorship programs. We need, money is great, words are great, but actions are greater, right? And so getting people in positions of power to not just throw dollars, not just make statements, but to make actions. And so I think if wine can be a vehicle for community improvement, then that's probably even its bigger purpose. And I think we make a product that's here to be enjoyed, right? And we take ourselves seriously, but at the end of the day, we are making an alcoholic product, right? And if that can't improve people's lives, what are we doing? What in hell are we doing? So, that's what I hope wine's role in society is, and I hope that we continue to evolve that. And anything short of that, I think we have to have a real internal look at why we're here and why we're doing this. Yeah.
All right. All the questions that I have for you.
Cool.
Anything I didn't ask that I should have? Anything we didn't cover that we should have covered?
I don't know. I'm not a very good interviewer.
I think that's incorrect. You're a very good interviewee. So.
No. Thanks for being here, guys. Appreciate it. Sorry, monologues aren't my favorite. Listen, one asshole ramble on and on and on and on. Usually, I like this to be a multi-part. So, thank you for asking questions. Thank you for taking the time to be here. Thank you two, for quietly being behind the camera and doing your job. So, appreciate it. And,
awesome.
This is a special project, and I think will have real value to the industry going forward. So,
Thank you. Hope so too. Thank you for your time, for your stories today.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's have the hook.
Yeah.